On December 13, 1943, at precisely 9:27 a.m., Second Lieutenant Philip Adair was flying his Curtiss PN Warhawk over Assam, India, when a routine patrol suddenly turned dangerous. As he pulled into a climbing turn, 64 Japanese aircraft appeared through the morning haze just 3 miles to the east, flying directly toward his base at Denjin Airfield. Adair was only 23 years old, yet he had already flown 43 combat missions with the 89th Fighter Squadron. His job had been to protect the vital Hump Airlift, a dangerous supply route that carried fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies over the Himalayas to Chinese forces. That morning, however, there were no other American fighters nearby. He was completely alone in the sky. His aircraft, nicknamed Lulu Bell and marked with the number 44, carried 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, but he had only about 12 seconds of total firing time. The enemy force was overwhelming. It included 24 Mitsubishi Kai-21 Sally bombers escorted by around 40 Nakajima Kai-43 Oscar fighters flying in layers above and below the bomber formation. Below Adair, Denjin Airfield was extremely vulnerable. 14 C-47 transport aircraft sat on the ground, fully loaded with critical supplies. A field hospital nearby was treating 63 wounded soldiers, and fuel stocks were only enough to support operations for 11 days. If the bombers reached the airfield without resistance, Allied supply operations over the Himalayas would be crippled for weeks. The nearest friendly fighters were based at Jorhat, 38 minutes away. Standard doctrine said pilots should wait for reinforcements when outnumbered more than 5-1. Adair faced odds of 64. Adair climbed to a position 4,000 feet above the bomber formation, approaching from the south with the sun behind him. This position helped hide his aircraft and reduced the chance of being spotted. The Japanese Oscar fighters had not seen him yet. Their attention was focused straight ahead on their target. Surprise was his only real advantage. The Japanese pilots expected American fighters to meet them near the airfield, not far out over open jungle. Adair planned his attack in seconds. He would strike the lead bombers first, ignore the escort fighters, and disrupt the formation badly enough to destroy their bombing accuracy. If the bombers scattered, the mission would fail. The lead Sally bombers were flying in a tight formation of 6 aircraft arranged in 2 V-shapes. Adair rolled his P-40 upside down, pulled the nose down, and began a steep dive from behind and above the bombers. His airspeed increased rapidly as the Allison engine roared at full power. The distance closed quickly, yet no defensive fire came from the bombers. The crews still had not seen him. At 800 yards, Adair opened fire. All 6 machine guns fired together and bright tracers streaked toward the lead bomber. Bullets tore into the left wing, ripping fabric and sparking against metal. Moments later, the bomber's engine burst into flames, trailing thick black smoke. The effect was immediate. The tight formation broke apart as bombers scattered in different directions to avoid collision. Order and discipline vanished in seconds. Adair pulled up hard, 7GS pressing him into his seat, and rolled away from the attack. His strike had worked, but it also revealed his position. Almost instantly, 40 Oscar fighters turned and began diving toward. The Nakajima Kai-43 Oscar was one of the most maneuverable fighters of the war, capable of turning tighter than almost any American aircraft. Adair's P-40N Warhawk was faster in a straight line, but it could not match the Oscar in turning combat. Standard P-40 tactics were clear. Never turn with an Oscar, use speed, strike quickly, and escape before the enemy could react. But Adair could not escape. If he broke away, the bombers would regroup and continue their attack on Denjin Airfield. He had to stay close and keep pressure on them, even if that meant fighting 40 fighters alone. The first group of Oscars attacked him in loose formation. Adair rolled and fired a short burst but missed. He reversed direction and dove to build speed. 2 more Oscars came down from above. He pulled into a climbing turn and fired again, still without hits. His ammunition counter showed around 800 rounds remaining, enough for only a few more attack runs. Behind the fighters, the Sally bombers were already trying to reform into their bombing formation. If they succeeded, the attack would resume. Adair judged he had less than 90 seconds before they reached their bomb release point over Dengen. He rolled level, pushed the throttle fully forward, and dove again toward the bombers. 8 Oscars followed him down, but the P-40 accelerated to over 400 miles per hour in the dive. The Japanese fighters could not match that speed, allowing Adair to break. Adair pulled out of the dive at bomber altitude and lined up on the right-hand group of Sally bombers. At 300 yards, he fired a long burst. Tracers slammed into the lead bomber's right engine, which exploded in a massive fireball. The aircraft rolled violently, trailing flames and debris as its wingman broke away to avoid collision. Adair skidded left and fired again at another bomber. His bullets punched through the thin fuselage with deadly effect. The Ki-21 bomber had no armor protection for its crew and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Designed in the mid-1930s, it was already outdated by 1943. As Adair pulled away, 12 Oscar fighters closed in again, determined to stop him. His fuel gauge showed 162 gallons remaining, and his ammunition had dropped to around 650 rounds. The bombers were still 19 miles from Dengen, but time was running out. Then another danger appeared. His engine temperature began to climb rapidly. After more than 11 minutes at full power, the coolant temperature reached 230 degrees Fahrenheit, well above safe limits. At 250 degrees, the engine would fail completely. Adair faced a hard choice: reduce power and retreat, abandon the attack, or keep fighting and risk engine failure over. 2 Oscar fighters attacked Adair head-on at a combined closing speed of more than 600 miles per hour. Both opened fire, and he saw their tracers racing toward his cockpit. Adair fired back with his heavier, .50 caliber guns. At 350 yards, his round struck one Oscar's engine cowling. The fighter shuddered, broke away, and trailed white coolant vapor. His own coolant temperature climbed to 240 degrees as the bombers tried to reform again, now 15 miles from the target. Adair dove past 6 intercepting Oscars at nearly 400 miles per hour and attacked the lead bomber once more. His first burst hit the bomber's wing root. The structure failed, the outer wing panel tore away, and the aircraft rolled inverted into a fatal spin. The formation shattered again, scattering in multiple directions. Even if bombs were dropped now, they would fall harmlessly across miles of jungle. Adair pulled up hard as his engine began to run rough. The control stick vibrated violently as overheating caused detonation inside the cylinders. 8 Oscars dove on him from above. He rolled left but was too slow. Enemy rounds tore through his right wing, and one hit the aileron control rod, making the aircraft difficult to control. The fight was far from over, but Adair had already done enough to break the bombing attack and save. Enemy fire continued to strike Adair's aircraft as he pulled away from the bombers. Another burst walked up the fuselage, sparks flashing across the engine cowling. One round pierced the coolant reservoir behind the firewall, and green coolant sprayed across the windscreen, partially blinding him. The temperature needle climbed past 260 degrees Fahrenheit as steam poured from the seams of the cowling and oil pressure dropped sharply. The Allison engine was failing fast. Adair pulled back the throttle, and engine speed fell from 3,000 to 2,400 revolutions per minute, no longer enough to maintain altitude. The P-40 began descending at 1,000 feet per minute, then faster. The Oscar fighters circled above him, waiting for the inevitable crash. Then flames appeared along the engine cowling, pulled forward by the rushing air. If the fire reached the fuel lines, the aircraft would explode within seconds. Standard procedure demanded immediate bailout, But Adair was only 8,000 feet up and deep over hostile jungle controlled by Japanese patrols. He made a desperate decision. He pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff for several seconds, starving the fire of fuel. The flames weakened. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine coughed, shook violently, then continued running at roughly 60% power. It was not enough to climb, but it could barely hold level flight. Behind him, the Sally bombers turned southeast toward Burma. The raid was over. Denjin Airfield was safe, but Adair now faced the far harder task of getting home alive in a burning, crippled aircraft. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Chabua, 43 miles away. If the engine held together, it would take about 15 minutes. 6 Oscar fighters followed him at a distance, watching. At 7,000 feet, oil pressure dropped to 0. Without lubrication, metal ground against metal inside the engine, generating extreme heat as parts began to seize. Power fell further, and the propeller windmilled unevenly. Airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour, dangerously close to stall speed. The Oscars closed to 400 yards but did not fire. They were waiting. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot gestured downward, signaling surrender. Adair ignored him. Smoke began filling the cockpit from damaged wiring behind the instrument panel. His eyes burned and his throat tightened. He slid the canopy open, letting cold air rush in and clear some of the smoke. Airspeed fell again to 160 miles per hour. The Oscars backed away. They believed he was already finished. Then, at 4,000 feet, the right aileron control cable snapped completely. The aileron slammed to full deflection. The P-40 rolled sharply to the right, and the nose dropped into a steep dive. Adair. The dive accelerated rapidly. Airspeed passed 200 miles per hour, then 220, then 250. The jungle rushed upward as altitude dropped through 3,000 feet. Adair knew he was seconds from impact. Then a desperate idea came to him. The damaged aileron was forcing one wing down, and the broken elevator cables left the aircraft trimmed nose down. Gravity and airflow were pulling him into the dive, but aerodynamics worked both ways. If he rolled the aircraft upside down, the damaged controls might push the nose up instead of down. At 1,800 feet, Adair rolled the P-40 fully inverted. Negative G-forces slammed him against his shoulder straps as blood rushed to his head. The engine sputtered as the fuel system struggled inverted, nearly quitting before catching again. Slowly, unbelievably, the nose rose. The dive slowed. At 1,200 feet, the aircraft leveled out upside down at around 140 miles per hour. Adair held the inverted position for nearly 40 seconds, gaining a small amount of altitude. Against all logic, the aircraft was flying again. Fuel starvation soon forced him upright, and the damaged controls immediately pushed the nose down. The aircraft began descending once more. Adair waited until he lost several hundred feet, then rolled inverted again. The nose rose. He gained altitude, then rolled upright to feed fuel. The pattern repeated again and again, inverted to climb, upright to feed fuel. Above him, the 6 Oscar fighters circled, watching in disbelief. A damaged American fighter was flying upside down, then right side up, refusing to fall. One Oscar dove to investigate. Adair rolled inverted, gained altitude, then rolled upright directly toward the Japanese fighter. The Oscar broke away immediately. The Japanese pilots decided the American was either insane or already dead. They turned east and left. Adair continued his slow, rolling climb toward Chabua. His fuel gauge showed 83 gallons remaining. Oil pressure had been at 0 for 9 minutes. By every mechanical rule, the engine should have seized. Somehow, it continued running on heat. Adair's altitude reached 3,000 feet, then 4,000. Chabua Airfield appeared ahead, 21 miles away. Smoke still streamed from the cowling, but the flames were gone. Then another problem appeared. The landing gear was hydraulic and depended on engine power. His engine was barely running. If it failed while the gear was down, he would crash short. If he landed with the gear up, the aircraft might explode. He pulled the gear lever. Nothing happened. His hands shook from carbon monoxide poisoning after breathing smoke for more than 10 minutes. With almost no hydraulic pressure, the gear remained locked. The P-40 had a backup system, a manual hand pump. 28 strokes could lower the gear by hand. Adair secured the control stick with his seat belt and began pumping with both hands. Slowly, pressure built. At the final strokes, the gear dropped and locked in. With the engine completely dead, the P-40 became a powerless glider. Adair quickly judged his situation. The Warhawk's normal glide ratio was poor, roughly 8-to-1, meaning that from 2,000 feet he could glide only about 3 miles. The runway was just over 2 miles away, which might have been possible under perfect conditions. But his aircraft was badly damaged. Bullet holes in the wings and fuselage created extra drag, and the extended landing gear slowed him even more. He was losing altitude too fast. He realized he would fall short of the runway and crash in the jungle after surviving the impossible. Then he remembered something from training that few pilots ever used in combat. Inverted flight could sometimes reduce drag at certain angles. With nothing left to lose, Adair rolled the aircraft upside down at 1,800 feet. Blood rushed to his head, his vision reddened, but he held the position. The airspeed stabilized and the rate of descent decreased. Flying inverted, the damaged Warhawk began to stretch its glide. Ground crews at Chabua watched in disbelief as an inverted P-40 approached the airfield with its landing gear already down. Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez spotted the aircraft through binoculars and immediately thought a Japanese pilot had captured an American fighter. Smoke trailed from the engine as the aircraft descended. Martinez and several crewmen ran toward a nearby .50 caliber machine gun position and began tracking the incoming fighter. Meanwhile, Adair was fighting to stay conscious. Carbon monoxide poisoning and negative G-forces were closing in on him. His vision narrowed into gray tunnels and his thoughts slowed. At 400 feet, he was still inverted and had only seconds left. He knew he had to roll upright at the last possible moment. Too early, and the damaged controls would drive him into the ground short of the runway. Too late, and he would overshoot. At 200 feet and 300 yards from the threshold, Adair rolled the aircraft right side up. The damaged aileron forced one wing down, but he fought it with everything he had left, leveling the wings just enough to line up with the runway. The P-40 crossed the runway threshold barely 90 feet above the ground, descending too fast and too steep. It dropped the final distance in seconds. The main wheels slammed onto the concrete with crushing force, collapsing the landing gear instantly. The tail struck hard, metal shrieking as the aircraft spun violently to the right. Sparks flew as the wingtip dug into the runway. The fighter skidded backward nearly 200 feet before grinding to a stop. Smoke poured from the engine compartment as fire crews rushed forward. For several seconds, Adair did not move. Then he released his harness, stood up and climbed out onto the wing. His legs buckled, but ground crew caught him before he fell. When the cowling was opened, the damage was clear. The engine was completely destroyed. Pistons were seized, the crankshaft warped, and coolant and oil coated everything. The airframe showed 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 7 in the right wing and 4 in the left. One round had severed the aileron control cable, another punctured the hydraulic system, and electrical wiring was shredded. Lulu Bell would never fly again. Philip Adair had saved Dengen Airfield. Intelligence reports confirmed that all 24 Sally bombers turned back without dropping a single bomb. The Japanese formation scattered 15 miles short of the target and returned to Burma empty. No Allied aircraft were destroyed, no ground personnel were killed, and the hump airlift continued without interruption. 3 days later, doctors confirmed that Adair had been flying with severe carbon monoxide poisoning during the final minutes of the mission, a condition that should have rendered him unconscious. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell awarded him the Silver Star for extraordinary gallantry. Adair later flew 95 more combat missions, became an ace, and retired from the Air Force as a full colonel. On December 13, 1943, one pilot, one damaged fighter, and unbreakable determination proved that impossible odds mean nothing when someone refuses to give up.